For thousands of years, dedicated priests have kept secret knowledge in Egypt that contains all the basics that modern science is using today, from gene technology to creating nuclear reactors. There is no doubt that the ancient scientists and sages had incredible and mysterious knowledge. Curiously enough, whenever we go back to the time of the Great Flood, we always read about 7 wise men who survived and then laid the foundations of the new age of human civilization. Were they real? What was their involvement in the construction of the first ancient temples, such as the Egyptian pyramids, or were they just a figment of someone's imagination? We will try to find out together in the new episode of Minds of Eternity. Welcome, guys. The evidence from the prehistoric era on the walls of the temple at Edfu, situated between Luxor and Aswan in Upper Egypt, is interesting. This temple is believed to have been built in 237–257 BC. Scientists consider the texts on the walls the few surviving fragments that explain the beginning of the cosmos, or cosmogony. Professor Raymond from the University of Manchester tells us that these texts contain hidden references and messages. It's about certain mythical events, which is why the laying of the cornerstone, the construction, and the functioning of the historic temple are all set in the same mythical era. The temple was believed to be a creation of the gods, which led us to the conclusion that, according to the ideas of that time, it was an immediate continuation, projection, and a reflection of the mythical temple that had existed since the beginning of the world. Now, the phrase "from the beginning of the world" could mean the first age, which the ancient Egyptians called Zep-Tepi. In that same era, Thoth recorded the words of the wise men and delivered them in a book that described the location of specific sacred mounts along the Nile. The title of this lost book was something like Description of Mounts of the Ancient Times. These ancient inscriptions on the walls of the temple at Edfu refer to a group of 7 wise men. They were the only divine beings who knew how to build temples and sacred cities. And they supervised the construction works on the ancient hill, as they called it. Interestingly enough, many experts equate the ancient hill on the rocks with the location of the pyramids of Giza. Interesting. Another such place is Heliopolis, as there was a sacred peak or a hill from which the first sunrise had been seen. It sounds so beautiful. Thoth himself participated in the activity of the wise men, and together they are believed to have built the first mythical temples of ancient times, including the Egyptian pyramids, as Thoth himself recounts in his Emerald tablets. Modern archaeologists know very little about the seven and their identity, having concluded only that there are seven in number, obviously, and have an important role in the theory of the origin of the world's first sacred sites. Another interesting thing are the depictions of the deluge, described as primordial waves from which the prehistoric hill rises. The first thing that comes to mind is the legend of Noah, but the seven wise men appear also in other legends, which raises the question: did they really exist, or are they a fragment of someone's imagination? What do you think? For example, there is no scientific literature about the origin of the seven sages, who after a natural calamity appear as heralds of knowledge. But all over the world, there are extremely detailed legends, which is a paradox. The most famous story is that of the flood, according to which one of the gods decided to destroy the civilization because of its corruption. Moses left us one of the stories of what happened in the first book of the Old Testament. As in other legends, each time there is a chosen one, in this case a man, or a couple or a few people who need to survive and are warned of the impending disaster. If, however, we remove the mythical parts, what's left is a historical work that offers an explanation of the development of humanity's past. But the story of Noah, who laid the foundations for a better humanity by defeating the flood, cannot be precisely dated, so it is difficult to assign it to a specific historical time. Also, since 1872, discoveries have been made that suggest that the biblical account of the deluge is borrowed from older sources, such as those of the archaic deity Aya, and therefore is essentially of Egyptian origin. It is a deity closely related to Min and Set. In fact, in 1849, the British archaeologist Sir Austin Layard and his assistant Harmust Rassan discovered several brick-covered mounds at Nineveh, which prompted them to excavate further. In September, the same year, the two discovered some 25,000 clay tablets covered with cuneiform inscriptions. The clay tablets contained spiritual and scientific works on philosophy, astronomy, and mathematics. They also accounted a number of ancestors of the kings who ruled the country before and those who ruled after a great flood disaster. And these tablets contained Mesopotamia's greatest literary work, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is the legend of Gilgamesh, the Sumerian hero who was 2/3 god and 1/3 man and claimed he was immortal like the gods. German professor Theodor Quassmann of the University of Cologne was able to find the first lines of this literary work. He found them in the basement of the British Museum in London, and the clay tablet read, "Gilgamesh, who saw the wellspring, the foundations of the land, who knew the world's ways, was wise in all things." The Epic of Gilgamesh was engraved in the form of a poem on 12 clay tablets. It only managed to survive because the newly arrived conquerors of Mesopotamia did not consider cuneiform a writing. The quatrains, 200 in number, contain striking similarities to the Bible, only they were written several millennia before it. The archaeologists who made this discovery didn't realize how sensational it was and wrapped it badly before they shipped it to Britain for translation. Therefore, due to the incompetent treatment, many of the tiles were damaged and could not longer be read. It was only thanks to the work of George Smith, a previously unknown young employee of the British Museum in London, that the historical significance of these ancient legends became clear. At that time, however, no one in the so-called scholarly world knew that there was a Babylonian Assyrian literature that deserved to be ranked alongside the great achievements of later writers. Young Smith had just reached the spot when Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu successfully defeated the fiery bull Humbada in the Kedar forest of present-day Lebanon. On her triumph return, the goddess Ishtar saw Gilgamesh dressed in his festive robes, wearing the victor's crown, and fell in love with him. He, on the contrary, didn't wish to know anything about his admirer and insulted her, calling her a prostitute, for she already had many love affairs. After this humiliation, Ishtar returned enraged to heaven and complained to the great goddess. Then she demanded from her father, Anu, the death of Gilgamesh. See what happened. In response, Anu created a bull of heaven on earth, whom 100 warriors could not tame. But Gilgamesh stood the test and was victorious again with the help of his friend Enkidu. Ishtar, who watched the fight from heaven, cursed Gilgamesh and Enkidu. On the night that followed, Enkidu saw in a dream the council of the gods, condemning him because he had helped Gilgamesh in the destruction of Humbaba. The sentence was immediately carried out, for Enkidu died that very night from an incurable disease. Gilgamesh mourned for his friend, but at the thought that he too was going to die, he shuddered with fear, and then he remembered a distant relative to whom the gods had granted immortality. Gilgamesh set out in search of Utnapishtim. But just when everything was about to become clear, the story ended. Smith found out that these were only one part of the inscriptions, and the story of the immortal Utnapishtim was present only partially. The clay tablets with the continuation of this epic were hidden somewhere in the chambers of the palace of Nineveh. In fact, Smith was excited to discover also the moment in the story where Utnapishtim told Gilgamesh about the time before the Great Flood. Of course, what he had read so far of the Epic of Gilgamesh kept bugging him. Smith was discouraged because he wanted to go to Nineveh at all cost to continue his research. But that cost a lot of money, and for a simple employee like him, it was very difficult to secure a funding. Besides, who would agree to help find the clay tablets that might contain evidence that the Bible doesn't offer the oldest information, and even more, it's not the only source. However, a London benefactor invested about 1,000 guineas, about 40,000 euros, in George Smith's venture and challenge. It was the London's Daily Telegraph, which showed risk-prone interest in the young researcher's reports, making our access to ancient knowledge possible. On December 3, 1872, George Smith shared his discovery with the surprised audience of London's Society of Biblical Archeology. Even though some people were not thrilled about it and even criticized him, nothing could stop his determination. As a result, a research team set off for Nineveh in early 1873. As soon as they arrived, Smith started digging on May the 7th. His dedication was remarkable, and in a massive pile of rubble, he discovered 384 fragments of clay tablets, including the missing parts of Utnapishtim's story. He was right. And the tablets tell us, long before the flood of the Euphrates River, there was the city of Shuruppak, when the gods decided to flood the land. The god Ea, who participated in the council of the gods, chose to be a guardian of the man Utnapishtim and decided to warn him of the impending disaster. Man of Shuruppak, give up your wealth and build a ship to save your life. Take all kinds of seeds with you on the ship. The measures by which you shall build are well calculated. That confirmed Smith's assumption that the man was experiencing the same thing as Noah from the Bible. These Mesopotamian legends were more detailed and contained considerably more additional information than the Old Testament. And also later in the story, Gilgamesh did find his relative Utnapishtim and ask him how he too could achieve immortality of the gods. Tell me, how did you gain access to the gods' council, and how did you gain eternal life? After Gilgamesh and Utnapishtim talked for a while, the latter told him that the gods had a strange place where a miraculous flower grew that made him immortal like the gods. I'll let Gilgamesh know what's hidden. I will tell you the secret of the gods. There is a plant there. You can prick on it like on a thorn. The two of them set out on their way to the eastern sea to get the flower. According to the legend, the submarine-like vehicle was sailing on the water or under it, and a few days later it finally reached its destination. Perhaps the travelers were using a submarine because in the legend Utnapishtim pointed out that the plant's location on the seabed and then showed Gilgamesh a type of plant and explained its property. These plants are magical herbs and bring back youth to people. In 1876, after 3 years of hard work, George Smith returned to England, where he published his innovative, for that time, theory regarding the Bible. Noah and Utnapishtim are in reality the same man who was struck by the same natural disaster. Sadly, George died when he was only 36, and he couldn't witness the triumph of the geological confirmation of his theory by Sir Charles Leonard Woolley. In August 1998, after many years of research, Dr. William Ryan once again confirmed Charles Woolley's results. According to them, after the warming of the northern hemisphere, the water from the melting glaciers had raised the level of the ocean to such an extent that the former land strip between Europe and Asia Minor had broken off at the Bosphorus. According to Dr. Ryan's theory, the Black Sea did not yet exist, but around its deepest point there was a freshwater lake whose shores were inhabited by people. Around 8,900 BC, the Mediterranean Sea must have overflowed the former lake, which today can still be found at the bottom of the Black Sea with a force 200 times greater than that of the Niagara Falls. For 2 years, about 16 cubic kilometers of seawater kept flowing into the Black Sea every day, so that the sea level was rising by about 15 centimeters a day. In that flood-like disaster, the lake expanded by 2 kilometers in 1 day. Dr. Ryan concludes, out of this hell could have arisen the biblical deluge. On September 28, 1999, James Ballard, the man who discovered the Titanic, said that he only wanted to give 140 meters deep to look for well-preserved ships from biblical times. In the summer of 2000, he managed to achieve his goal and found the remains of ancient buildings near the northern Turkish town of Sinop. The people who once lived there must have left their homes in a hurry, trying to escape and save their lives. Interestingly, with all these facts, we'd better consider that neither the Old Testament nor the cuneiforms are telling us about a natural disaster, but about the punishment controlled by the gods. Furthermore, the texts are talking about a worldwide flood and not just localized to a particular area. Hence, the real cause of the worldwide catastrophe actually came from heaven. Furthermore, there are more than 300 flood legends in the world, which always refer to the Great Flood, as well as to a chosen one appointed by the gods and to the building of a corresponding ark. The inscriptions on the walls of the temple at Edfu tells us that the 7 wise men came from a small island that was destroyed by a great flood. Besides, all the inscriptions at Edfu say that they came from an island, the first homeland of the first people, and the island was destroyed by a flood. Most of the people drowned, and the few who survived moved to Egypt, where they became the builder gods of ancient times. Was this the story of Atlantis? Was this something else? Who were actually these 7 wise men and these mysterious people? We will answer this next week in the second part about those 7 mysterious wise men who laid the foundation of the new human civilization. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's very new, we're just starting, and we're actually trying something very different, something very new, and we'll see how it's gonna go. I hope that we can reach as many people as possible, because this lost knowledge that we are talking about, that we will share in the next couple of episodes, probably the next year, is about and needs to get to as many people as possible. If you care about our evolution as species, our spiritual evolution, our human evolution, then dive deep into what the ancients were looking for, about what they were seeking, about what they found, what they left us to read, to learn, to expand, and to improve. The knowledge is already within us. Cheers for now, and I'll see you in a moment.